loud. Lovely. So welcome to day 5. I'm Nicola at Flourish Together, and my colleague Shelley's going to introduce the day before we get started on everything to do with sort of resourcing your ideas, getting them off the ground, and a whole bunch of stuff on finances as well. So over to you, Shelley. Do you want to just give people a bit of an outline of what to expect today over the next couple of days, I guess?
So welcome everyone. It's good to see you all, and we would normally maybe touch on some ground rules here. We don't particularly have any struggle in this group, but one thing to say is it's lovely to see your smiling faces on the camera, if at all possible, and lots of people feel it helps with engagement. But I'd say lots of people also find it difficult to be on camera either at all or for a long time, or might have problems with their connection. So do go on and off camera as you feel comfortable and as you see fit. So in a moment, Nicola is going to introduce you to the 2-sentence business plan. And this is a really simple business planning tool, very quick and easy, and it's a great place to get started. Following that, we're going to go through some income generation approaches and consider what's appropriate for different types of ventures, so you can think about where you can focus your efforts in terms of generating money for your venture. Then we'll have a quick break, and I will take you through these 7 steps, which are just a useful checklist for you to return to at any point to think about. If you ever feel that you're a bit lost, you can just return to and go, right, what needs doing to get off the ground? So there's 7 things you need to be thinking about right now. Then we've got a lunch break. Lunch is not provided. Again, apologies for that. And then this afternoon, we've got Gurj coming in to talk about some basic finances for startup businesses. So he'll be talking through some really straightforward and practical budgeting tools, and he'll be providing them to us afterwards. So you can use them as you can take his spreadsheets and use them as a basis for starting to planning your finances and thinking about your cash flow and so forth. And then we'll wrap up around about 2:30 today, ready for tomorrow.
No, another busy one tomorrow. So you'll find today we're not going to do big updates and who's who and all of that. People are very welcome to put anything in the chat, any specifics. The starter for tomorrow is all about sort of showing and telling about you, your organisations and so on. So there's plenty of time for updates, catching up and sharing what people are doing tomorrow, and obviously in breakouts and everything else today. But we will make a start with the session because there's a lot to cover this morning. So I'll just throw it out there. We'll get straight in. Part of today and tomorrow is around business planning, using different tools to do that. And we thought we'd just throw you in there. Sorry, I've got my kitten here. He's having a field day with all sorts of things on the table and kicking everything off the table. I'm sure she'll entertain herself. So you'll come to hear tomorrow when we get into a bit more thorough thinking around business planning. I don't scare people or get them too heavily bogged down with business planning. But that it has a place. It's definitely needed in terms of getting things out of your head, planning what you can plan, working out what you know and what you don't know, and giving you the language, or the best language you can find right now in the stage of development that your either idea or business is at. And these are an ongoing movable feast. You know, your vision and your goal and what you plan to do and why you're doing it probably won't change, but how you describe it and what the elements of it all look like will change. And so over today and tomorrow, we'll be hammering in and really looking at sort of business planning or project and idea planning and helping you think things through. And then next time, towards the end of the month, we'll be picking back up on something called theory of change, kind of evolving your business planning ideas and the elements of what you're doing to help you understand how to kind of, I guess, measure the performance of what you're trying to do and measure the impact, more importantly, in terms of social enterprises, so that you can try and calculate the impact and value of what you're doing. And that all helps strengthen funding bids and everything else, which is something we'll be touching on and looking at today. So hope you're going to sort of, we're moving swiftly along. You know, the first few days of the Time to Grow programme were really about you and about unpacking your head and where you're at and where you've been on your journey and what skills you've got to take forward what you're trying to achieve, or to evolve and develop what you're trying to achieve. Now we really get stuck into the elements of mechanics and operations and making these things work well and become sustainable. So this task that we've got for the start of the day is quite simple, or I hope it's quite simple. Shelley did email everybody a work pack. So in your inbox, you should have this as a PDF, I'm guessing, if not as a PowerPoint, and you'll have access to a document with a series of tools that we're going to use over the next 2 days, and we'll keep referring back to those. But either way, if you've got a notepad and pen, you either use the work pack or print it out, or use it within the electronic versions, write on a notepad, whatever way is best for you, basically, to help you think through where you're at. And what I'm going to get you to do for the next 5 or 10 minutes is really start to answer all these questions. You might not have answers to all of them, but you might have answers to quite a few. And this really is an entry-level version of what we'll move on tomorrow. People call the business model canvas, or the social business canvas. But I find that can put people off, and it can look a bit not confusing, but it's kind of, where do you start with that? This is quite straightforward. And so we're going to leave you for a few minutes to start to work through this stuff and think about, what do you know? What answers could you put in these boxes? Whether you're writing them out on your notepad, or whether you've printed something out, or you want to put stuff in an electronic document. Have a good 5 or 10 minutes. Some of this we've already started to cover in previous sessions, so we're obviously building on what we've talked about today. You've already started to think about, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Who's got this market? And that's, your target market in the main. What is it you're trying to deliver, do, or create to solve this problem? And those invariably will be your products and services and activities. Then we're starting to move into, why should people buy from you? Or why should people access your services, opportunities, events, whatever it is you're offering? What's unique? What's different about what it is you're doing, in your opinion? And then there's thinking through things like, either at the point in time where you're at, where this might still be a bit of a kernel of an idea, or if you've been running for things for some time, you'll have a clearer picture of this. But, what key resources do you need to have access to? And that's not just about money. That's about skill set, like we were talking about last time, and thinking about your skills audits and what skills you need that are essential for what you're doing. Other talent, other people, other contacts, other spaces. What are the key resources that you need or need to have access to either test something out, or to run what you're doing. For anyone who's just arrived, we've just done a bit of an intro on where, what's coming up, but today is all about starting to get your ideas or your ventures sort of direction in order. Starting with this 2-sentence business canvas, this is called. So rather than get bogged down in business planning just yet, and we're going to look at that in much more depth tomorrow, we're just throwing out there this 2-sentence business plan, where actually, if you can really succinctly put down in a nutshell what you're up to, not only does it give you a sense of clarity and be able to communicate quite easily and quickly the different aspects of what you're trying to do, because all of these types of questions are what different funders or customers or commissioners or the wider world might ask you, will need to know. But even if you can't answer these questions just yet, it will show you what you need to work on. So we've been running through some of the stuff that you should already have a clearish sense of, which will look like, the problem and the social issue that you're trying to address. It will look like your products and services of how you're trying to address that. It'll look like thinking about what's unique or distinct about what you're doing. How do you differ from other projects, products, or services that are out there? Why should people be coming to you? Looking at the resources that you need, and we'll be building on this this afternoon. And then thinking about the marketing side of things, you know, how are you going to reach your customers? Not only your beneficiaries, and we'll look at these in slightly different ways, but there are the beneficiaries, there are the people who are going to benefit from what you're doing, and they may well be your customers. They may well be paying directly for your services, activities, events, stuff you're selling, products you're selling. But more often than not, the people that you're working with might not have the resources to pay. And so you might be finding ways through various means, and we'll look at this shortly, to make things free at the point of access. And so marketing and sales in the social business world has a 2 or 3 pronged approach. You know, so when we ask the question, how will you reach the customer? You might want to think, who's paying for this? Because ultimately, that's your customer. Whoever's paying for this to happen is your customer, and whoever's benefiting is a beneficiary. And you'll need to create the right communications and the right marketing appropriately. And you might use different methods for that. You might have a database of emails. You might be running some outreach events and activities to get hold of people, to then talk to them and find out what they want to do and create new opportunities for them. You might be using social media or other sort of traditional marketing methods. So just jotting down how you're going to be reaching your customer, and thinking as well, is there a cost? What's the cost attached to reaching them? You know, which links into the next question. You know, there are many ways, as you'll be finding on these bolt-on courses that you're hopefully doing, many ways of using cost-effective ways to market what you're doing, word of mouth, social media, piggybacking other people's events and all sorts of things like that. But thinking about the time implications and other practical cost implications around reaching your customers is also something to, you know, how will you reach them, and just weighing up what your capacity level is like for doing that, what your skills and knowledge levels like for doing that, and is there some other cost attached to what you want to do. And then on this, how much will this cost and how will you make money? Certainly the how much will this cost, you won't necessarily know that right here and now, and you can't put your whole financial plan in that box. But certainly if you're at the idea stage, or if you've got a sense of what you need to do in the next 6 months or the next 12 months, this is where your shopping list or your budget or your key things that are going to cost you money goes. And Gurge this afternoon in the finance session and budgeting and cash flow session this afternoon will really help you answer this box, or give you the tools to do that in your own good time. But have you any idea in terms of what it's costing you? If you're having to hire venues, if you've got travel costs, if you've got to pay other volunteers or staff to help you with what you're doing, are there materials that you have to pay for? You know, on a a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis, how much is this costing you? You know, Gurge will talk this afternoon about sort of, fixed costs, and then, other kinds of costs that kind of roll and wax and wane. Some are core costs that stick the whole time. Some are startup costs, and then there's, ongoing costs dependent on what it is you're doing that change over time. We're going to get into how you're going to make money and where's the money coming from for all of this in the next session, but just bullet pointing down how you think you're making money. We've started to talk about this in previous sessions, but today is a day to really ask some serious questions, because you might not know right now, particularly if you're in that camp where everybody you want to work with are your beneficiaries and you've not yet found out who's the customers and who's paying for this. Or you might have started working with people because there's a real social need there and there's not an income stream that's visible right now to come through from that. But, by using your skills or your services with slightly different communities or a broader community that can afford to pay, you can get that Robin Hood effect going. Or you might have routes to look at funding or commissioning and other things that we're going to look at shortly. But how do you imagine, or how do you know if you're running it, where's your money coming from? Is it, grants? Is it commissions? Is it selling product A, B, and C, selling service A, B, and C? And are you, you know, is it, you know, covering it the bare minimum and washing its face? Is it a full cost recovery where you know this is well costed out and everything's got a full cost attached, and you're charging what you're doing accordingly? Or are there things that are going to need to be subsidised through grants or sponsorship or other means? So just having a think about, from what you know right now, how you're going to be making money, and what, you know, paying attention to whether you feel that that's fully costed, or whether, you know, there's a chance that you're making a loss. In an ideal world, what we're wanting to help you to move towards is look at where you're making margins where you can. You can't make margins, particularly on grants. You can't often make margins on commissions, but you can certainly drive up the price or the margin that you can make within certain sectors or working with certain customers. So just having a think about that. Shelley's going to move on to this shortly with you, but in thinking about everything that we've looked at here, this kind of what are your products and services and what you're trying to do, and how are you going to make this, you know, this viable? We've got a timeline to think about. What's your current line of sight? Are you looking at, you know, really getting focused and use your line of sight in the next 3 to 6 months? Because you want to test something, get something moving, launch a new service? Or are you thinking about, you know, the next 6 to 12 months because you need to just take your time, build your skills, build your networks? You know, just thinking about what's a realistic timeline for you, so that when Shelley's talking to you shortly about this 7 steps to getting things done, you've got a fairly realistic timeline for, you know, what's coming up. What's the horizon look like for you? Is it short term? Is it slightly medium term? Is it long term? And just having a think about how you want to plan. And then moving on to, you know, what are your measures of success? We talked about goals and having SMART objectives, I think last time, that within any of this, if you don't know what your measures of success look like, be that, you know, personally for you, be that financially, be that specific impact that you want to have with your community, be that, you know, world change for the better, you know, whatever your measures of success are, being clear and being key about those not only helps you come up with strategies and create the right services in order to do that, but it helps give you something to measure and something to check against over that timeline. You know? So you might be checking, you know, what are your measures of success for the next 3 to 6 to 12 months? You know, what are you hoping to achieve, you know, personally and professionally, financially, and in terms of impact for your community? What would good look like? What would great look like if everything went to plan, and if you could make this all happen? You know, and sometimes that, you know, people put pressure on themselves, and actually success really takes a good long while. But there's having some short-term measures of success in terms of what you're trying to get off the ground, and then there's having those I guess impact measures of success where you're trying to create whatever culture change, or change the way that communities can access things, or improve health and well-being, you know, reduce crime, protect the environment, you know, but being very specific, or as specific as you can possibly be, so that things are, you know, very specific, so that you can measure them, so that, you know, you feel achievable because you know exactly what it is you're trying to do. Realistic, hopefully, because you've put a plan in place and you've got these contacts and you put a budget together to try and do this. And time bound, as we, you know, referring back to this timeline, you're giving, you know, you can set these plans and these goals, and you can try and draw a line in the sand for when you want to have achieved them by. But even if you haven't achieved them by then, even if you get to that point and not everything went to plan, or certain things worked, certain things didn't, you can measure what worked, what didn't, and why. And it's all a, you know, a evolving cycle of trying to hit that goal, whether it's personal goals, professional goals, financial goals, or clearly goals of impact in your community. And then this is a lot, although it looks quite a simple slide, there's a lot to think about on a Wednesday morning. and in planning this through and hopefully bullet pointing down as you are, once you've got through the questions you can answer, and some of them you'll have like clear bullet points, and others, you know, might look a bit empty or there might not be much there yet, and that's fine. Once you've worked through these little sections, you'll then, you know, and we've got 2 days to do this, you know, it's not all happening now, but this is just to get you in the zone. Perhaps towards the end of the questions here, just having a think, you know, what are the in digesting what you've put down, what might be your, you know, 3 key actions? What are the 3 key things that you might see as being priority in the next month or so to help progress this? And it might be actually you have no clue how much it costs to do what you're trying to do. So spending some time really looking at budgeting after today and thinking through how you're going to do that. It might be looking at, you know, funding or governance options in order to move forward. It might be that, you know, actually you've got this thing and you're ready to go now, and you've just got to do some sort of testing or market research activities to get people in a room or in a Zoom or wherever else to get that sounding board and that engagement with your community to get that feedback. Or it might be that you've been running for some time and there's a suspicion, having done that exercises like this, you now realise there's something key that you're not doing. Maybe you need to really push on your sort of marketing or media or PR activities to shout about what you're doing, either to celebrate or to reach out to people and get more customers or more beneficiaries interested. It might be you recognise that there's some skills gaps from having done the last few days, or, you know, and you know, through thinking things through here, there might be some gaps. You might need to do some training in a particular. So you'll know what your own action points are. It might be that actually you've had a really busy few months and you just need to go and have a lie down, you know, and take a week or 2 to just regroup with yourself before you even tackle this. So everything about these kinds of activities is about thinking it through and then working it through at your own pace. So I think with a couple of people who perhaps had a little bit late and be wondering, what are we doing? So what we've been doing for the last 10 minutes or so is giving people time to think about this 2-sentence business plan. And in a moment, we're going to start putting people into some breakouts, because actually, you know, if you hit a brick wall with this and you're like, oh, I don't know where to go next with this, you might, you know, talking it through with people in a group can also help sort of catalyse ideas or help you realise things or understand things in different ways. So we're going to go into breakouts shortly, but we've been giving people the opportunity to use this quick and easy tool called the 2-sentence business plan to answer these questions as best they can. You know, in terms of your idea or your venture, you know, what's the problem? You know, what are the top problems you're trying to do? What are the pain points? And we'll be talking about this more tomorrow with Shelley. What are the pain points of your customers or beneficiaries? You know, what's really bothering them? You know, and who has this problem? And then how you're going to solve it with different ideas, products and services. We're getting people to think about, you know, what's unique or distinct about what you're doing. How might you have the advantage? You know, it might be that you've got particular knowledge or intelligence. It might be that you've got particular lived experience. It might be that you can do things in a more cost-effective way. It might be that you're more accessible. It might be that you're getting out in the physical world where everyone else is stuck indoors and you're really going to get hold of people. You know, what's different about what you're doing? And then, you know, I won't rattle through them all because we've discussed these, and I want to get you talking and asking questions and in breakouts. But there's still a few minutes to work through these questions and get as far as you can. And we did send everybody these this morning on a email. Shelley sent them out as a work pack. So whether you've been doodling these out in a notebook or whether you've looked at your email and you're either printing them out or you're using them in the background to think things through, whichever way is best for you to work through some of the tools that we're using today is entirely up to you. So just wondered how people have been getting on with this and whether people have got any questions or whether anything's unclear or anything you've noticed, and then we will be getting you ready for breakout shortly. So I can't see everybody because of the way my screen's up. I'm going to see as many of you as I can, but if anybody wants to come off mute, put a hand up or ask questions out loud in the chat. Anybody got any queries on this for starters?
Can you actually type on the sheet?
You can't, unfortunately, no.
Okay.
Well, you can actually. So I've done a white one, and you just add a text box. So it's in PowerPoint.
Perfect.
All you do is just add a text box, and then it's quite useful to do it like that, because then you can update it really easily whenever you want to, and have different versions as well. You might have one that you want from previous years. So yeah, just add a text box.
I wasn't sure if you sent a PDF. Sometimes if people have a PDF or something, it's harder to type them up. Brilliant.
Yeah.
If you've got the PowerPoint version, you can just open the PowerPoint, stick in as Shelley says, a text box, and type away at your leisure. So we've got a question here. I'd love to know more about who's paying for something. Yeah. Most definitely, and we'll be looking at that. Got anything other funds, and I might, given this question, I'm thinking there's probably a quick tool that we can give you tomorrow about this. I don't think it's planned in, but understanding your customers, beneficiaries, and stakeholders is a big part of running any social enterprise. And so customers are the ones with the big shiny pound signs on their foreheads. Beneficiaries are the ones who really want and need what you've got to offer and are going to attend, and their lives will be changed as a result, hopefully, or something will improve for somebody, or be experienced as a result. And stakeholders is anyone and everybody who's got a vested interest in seeing your idea or venture succeed or fail. There are multi-stakeholder people, and we can look at that and make sure we do. But in terms of this exercise, customers are the people who've got the money, and that might be a funding agency, it might be a neighbourhood manager, it might be a housing association, community development worker that's got a budget for something. It might be GPs or clinical commissioning groups that might want to commission something. It might be schools or educational organisations. We'll come on to this shortly with where's the money coming from, but I don't know if you want to ask the question specifically, Jen. I don't know if I'm helping you there. Many people say they don't have funds. Yeah, well, it's all about the way you approach it. So we'll come to that in the next session. And they do, and they want to know who. Absolutely, a big part of getting them to part with their cash is having a really clear plan and having every answer to this 2-sentence business plan clear and succinct. And a big part of it is having trialed and delivered something, sometimes at your own risk, on your own time. So you've got to be really careful and manage pilots carefully. And if you've been doing things, the sessions at the end of March, on the 30th of March, we'll be really looking at theory of change and impact measurement, and that will help you pin down, if you've been running stuff, have you been evaluating it right? What can you go back over, or what can you project? And how do you find the language to convince those people with tight pockets to part with it? And in and around all of that, how do you stack yourself up so that you can potentially apply for funding and other things, which we're going to get onto shortly, as to act either as a pre-trading or a buffer or a research and development kind of grant to cover your at-risk sort of period whilst you get all your ducks in a row, showing your impact, showing the need, having the community there, and showing that your solution is unique and distinct and is having an impact. And it can take a good year or two, frankly, or more to get to that point. Yeah, exactly. So it's just, there are ways of fast tracking it, and sometimes it's all about, how many people you can engage with, how much you can do at risk, and what kind of contacts you've got to be able to find those customers. But conscious I'm chatting away here and I want to get you into groups. So I'm doing great getting customers, but the problem is tool storage. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and everybody's got different experiences, haven't they, of where they're at. So I think what I might do at this point, unless anyone's got any clarifying questions on what we've talked about here, and hopefully some of you have had a chance to doodle some bits out and have a think around what you are able to think about right now. And we'll be coming back to all of this, looking at it in more detail over these 2 days, but wherever you've got to in your thinking with these questions, and hopefully you've had enough breakfast or caffeine or whatever you need to get started, I'm going to just create some breakouts, probably of no more than 3 or 4 in a breakout. How many people have we got on the call, Shelley? I've got my participant list.
I'm on mute. We've got 17, I think, including us, so 15. And I think there might be somebody who doesn't necessarily want to join the breakout room.
I'll attempt to do 5 breakout rooms, and then at least, shall I? No, let's go for 4, and then you've got a few more in a group.
And if anyone doesn't feel they can join the breakout room, you just stay in the main room and don't accept the invitation to join.
So what we're going to do in a second, I'm just going to move this on. So what we're going to ask you to do for 15 minutes or so in a breakout is just chat with the people there to find out, where you've got with your plan, and if you can just have have to be strict with yourselves and give yourselves almost a bit of an elevator pitch. You don't have to go through the whole thing because you might not feel out the whole thing, but if you can just go through where you've got to in your thinking with this plan, or with this 2-sentence, it's two or 3 sentences, isn't it? If you can say what you can about what you know to your group, then they'll be able to sort of digest that and just give a bit of feedback on, how does where you've got to come across with a group, which areas you seem clear on, which areas you're less clear on, and which areas, might you need more development. That's the sort of gist. So in the groups there, each person should have a couple of minutes to just go through where they've got to with their planning so far, and take a little bit of observation or feedback or comments from the people in the breakout, and then on to the next person to give them a chance to share where they got to in their thinking. Does that sound okay? You've got 4-ish, 3 or 4 in a group. So we'll open those rooms. Just share where you've got to individually. And if there's time to give each other a little bit of feedback or get some thoughts on, how it's sounding and what things need a bit more development, that'd be great. So those should all be open now. If you can accept your invitation to join your breakouts, you should be in there. And they're not being recorded, the breakouts. I think we're getting there. I think we've got Asma, Vasily, and I might have to move Amy. She's sat on her own. I don't know if Asma, Christina, and Vasily are joining. Oh, Amy's back in the room. Hi, Amy. I'm going to move you because your other people have disappeared. So I'm going to just move you to room 2.
Yeah, Kayla.
Yeah.
I went into a room and nobody was there. So
I'm going to move you to a different room.
Okay, thank you.
And there are definitely people there.
Okay, thank you.
There we go. Right then, see what happens. She'll just pause and come back when we've had our breakouts. So we've talked just earlier about that 2-sentence business plan to get people's sort of juices flowing around what they know they're doing, where they're at with their planning. And tomorrow in a different session, we'll be building on that, looking at business planning, different tools for doing that, and a business model canvas. But we want to spend a little bit of time, the next half hour, just thinking about money. Where does the money come from? And how does it all work? And we've had some questions in the chat already around, making things work financially when people say they don't have the money, or even the budget holders, can be hard to get them to part with their cash, particularly if you're early stage or you're an unknown quantity to them. So for anyone who's just joined, we had been just spending a bit of time looking at the 2-sentence business plan, as we called it, and we'll come back to that tomorrow. And we're just going to have half an hour looking at how do social ventures make money, whether you're running one already, whether you're thinking of developing one, or whether you're just curious about, how this stuff works for future planning. Hopefully this next half hour will give you a feel for possibilities. So when I talk about this, I talk about having a good, income generation most social ventures need a multiple income streamed approach to what they're doing, because there'll be times when one part of the cocktail it works and then it doesn't, or there'll be times where whilst you're waiting for something to work over on one side of the equation, you know, another side, you know, there could be money coming in from elsewhere. So social ventures or charities or community businesses structured in the ways that, you know, we've been talking about, do have the beauty of being able to look at all of these aspects. You know, because you're doing what you're doing for social good, often, you know, there's clear community and social benefit from what you're doing. The wider public purse, so the public sector and commission work, or charitable and not-for-profit organisations put funding into making sure that organisations like ours can do what needs to be done and change things for the better. And there are other charities that are interested in helping people develop their skills, build their capabilities, regenerate communities. So there are reasons why the kinds of businesses or projects or organisations that we run can access this funding and fundraising in ways that perhaps the private sector can't. And so what I'm just going to walk through is what these things are. You know, what do these things mean? Just to be clear on all of this. And some of you, what you've got in your work pack and what I'm going to be asking you to do as an exercise is you've got a version of this. I think it's a white copy in case you wanted to print it out so you don't kill all your ink. And again, because it's in PowerPoint, if you want to put text boxes in it and bullet point stuff in, you could do that. Or you could just draw it out old school like I would and put your own thoughts in. So I'd be drawing out these boxes. And the purpose of this little tool is to help you bullet point down where are you already generating income in these boxes? Where can you see, where do you know money is coming in to you and what you're doing in these ways, you know, as we just start to describe them. Or if it's not happening just yet because you're early stage or you've not been aware of how to go about these things yet, what might be possible in future, you know, and to think about how your income generation cocktail is stacking up or might stack up in future. That's what we're going to be looking at. So we're going to walk through what these things are, and then we'll have a bit of a chat to hear some stories from people on kind of where they're at with what they're doing, if we can. So in terms of where to start, I'm going to start with trading, because that's kind of simple. People know what trading is in the main. It's buying stuff, buying products, buying services, paying for something direct usually. And so on this slide here, there's a whole bunch of stuff. We've got your bath bomb. You know, there are social enterprises selling soaps and bath bombs, whether they're supporting people to develop health and well-being and create these things as part of therapeutic activities, or whether, you know, it's people in communities creating jobs for local people, or they're out somewhere rural and there's something unique and fancy about what they're putting in their products. Social enterprises create, you know, therapy products, soaps, bath bombs, and all that sort of stuff. Some of you might have come across this chocolate. I know I've eaten a fair bit of it. Divine Chocolate. It's a social enterprise organisation, one of the first sort of fair trade, well-known branded chocolate out there. There's a whole brilliant story behind what they do, and how they are much more ethical in terms of the way they recruit their farmers, the way they treat the environment, and what they do with their profits. So chocolate and selling chocolate is something that social enterprises do. There's one called Miss Macaroon based in the Midlands, and she trains up young people, and although she's getting, you know, you're getting commissioned by, you know, youth development teams and educational services to run skills development programs, they're selling the macaroons at, you know, £1 a pop or whatever they are, branded up to corporates, or, you know, nice and pretty in a box to wherever. And you know, it's another example of where some of those food-based social enterprises selling food items either as catering, like down the bottom here we've got, I think that's Heart and Parcel down the bottom. There's some ladies making some dumplings there. Heart and Parcel, they get their money from educational contracts and funding, but they also trade, and they sell their dumplings, and people buy their catering dumplings. And they've also, like the secret cookbook here, that Heart and Parcel have also done a cookbook. Others have, you know, it's not a straightforward thing, and I wouldn't go rushing into a cookbook, but where people know what they're doing with it and they can create them and make a profit. Duncan at Bounce Back Food, where it's a buy one, give one. So people buy their tins of food and buy other food items that they sell on markets and they sell online, and you buy your items and they give one to somebody who couldn't otherwise, you know, afford to pay for that. Is a way that Duncan's run Bounce Back Food for some time, and they've also gone into I think on their 4th crowd-funded cookbook now. So that's more of a kind of awareness raising, outreach, and slight profit margin making activity. But books and the publications are another way that people trade. There's a lot of social enterprise cafes out there, and there's an example of one there. Me again, so she was a hairdresser, still is a hairdresser, based over in the Wirral, and she's run as a hairdresser for years, traded as a hairdresser, and then she upskilled in some holistic therapies and, you know, built a team as a private business. And she realized that a lot of the people in her community have been affected by cancer and, you know, hair loss and, you know, the emotional and sort of physical difficulties of living with cancer had become apparent to her. And so she completely adapted her business, turned it into a community interest company, where she's, in addition to the hairdressing stuff, they sell wigs and they sell holistic therapy treatments and they sell, you know, tea and coffee at coffee mornings. So there's things that they're trading, but they're also commissioned by some of the cancer support services as well to do certain activities. So it's just highlighting on this slide a bunch of different ventures that are selling stuff. Down the bottom there, there's a picture of lots of people, like they're networking. That's a place in Croydon called MySpace. MySpace? No, I should know this. My Outspace, yeah, My Outspace it's called. And the lady that runs it's in the middle with a red top on there. And she set this up as a mother was struggling to find workspace that she could take her children to. So love it or loathe it, this is a co-working space where you can take your children with you, and there's a play area and the kids can play. Sometimes they have play workers in. They're in a building where there's other things going on, so that parents can go and work, they can take their children with them, and there's a bit of chaos. People expect it, but there's also some structured things for the young children and preschool age children to do. So you know, again, she's selling space and she's selling hot desking and she's selling room hire. Hopefully that helps. And yeah, there's a couple of more technological ones there, you know, apps. There are people that are selling apps and memberships and subscriptions for things. And there's a funny little thing there called Giraffe Reader. That was developed by a student at the Royal College of Art down in London. And it's a funny little flat pack piece of plastic. It looks like nothing. It probably costs about 2p to make, if I'm honest. But the cleverness of it is its design, and they've done it on purpose not to be all fancy, because this piece of what's it called, particular type of plastic that's easy to fold and cut and post out is basically a way that people who have visual impairment can have their documents read. So people all over the world, particularly in the developing world, but not just, you know, older people, anybody here in the UK and people in Africa and other developing countries have this very simple piece of design where a mobile phone can then be used with a certain softwares, and there's lots of these about, to read documents, fill in forms and everything else. So all sorts of ways that people are trading, you know, in a nutshell. You've then, you know, so be having a think on your little diagram or however you're doodling it out, what might you be trading? And you might not, you know, you might not think yet, you know, but usually services, they might be selling cooking classes, they might be selling training programs, they might be selling events, they might be selling physical things that you can hold in your hands, they might be selling digital widgets. You know, what in the scheme of products and services that you've got might you be selling and trading to the direct public or to the beneficiaries, or certain beneficiaries, even if not all can afford to pay for it? What are you trading, or what could you be trading? there are some charities and social enterprises who start off with a lot of the kind of funding or the commissions or doing things for free at the point of access, and that's all well and good. But they find they want to create a trading income, whether that's trading through a social enterprise kick or something, or whether that's setting up a trading arm of a charity. And once they've got their community together and they can see some of the talents and assets and skills that they've got, they can then start new complementary services that might have little to do with what they originally started. So they might set up a catering business alongside, the training and English language skills that they started running, or they might set up translation services alongside the project that they were running, or they might suddenly spot an asset or a venue, a bit like Flourish. We're about to take on Heaton Chapel station, first floor, and we'll be selling office space. Nothing to do with what we originally set out for, but the opportunities come about. It's a new trading income for us. So anyway, that's enough on trading. There's a lot covered there. Commissioning is a different kettle of fish. So trading is usually with the direct public or with the people who you would physically see, and you're trading all sorts of products and services. Commissioning, if you will, is like a wholesale version of that with a particular bulk buyer or purchaser of things. And these commissioners, they might be health and wellbeing commissioners, they might be local authority commissioners, there might be something called a joint commissioner that straddles both like health and local authorities. They could be, all sorts. There's loads of training and education commissioners of adult education, of youth and education. Thinking about the sector that you're working in and longer term, who might want to commission what you're doing. Commissioning is different. You don't go to them and say, here's my stuff, it costs this much, off you go. What happens is commissioners have priorities and needs. There are all sorts of strategic documents out there and policy documents that tell you what your local authorities or what your clinical commissioning group or what your education authorities are trying to achieve, or what your low carbon economy future strategy is trying to achieve. And there are people out there trying to tackle social problems or create certain outcomes in the world, be they to do with health, criminal justice, the arts, well-being, and you can either look at commissioning options that are small commissions and early stage commissions, or once you've evolved and grown, there are ways of going for particular tender opportunities, and people put out tender documents that you can respond to, and we'll come back to people in the room to just see if anybody's looked at some of this in a moment. But basically this isn't necessarily something for you when you're right at the start, but once you've got a tried and tested method and approach, and you can show it's hitting particular community groups, I mean in a positive way, it's creating momentum, and it's successful, and you can achieve these commissioning goals that different commissioners will have. They may then commission you to do stuff. And even if you're small, or even if you've only got a couple of years track record, if you're doing something particularly innovative, or if you're doing something with supposedly hard to reach groups, or with communities that commissioners or other funders or other public sector authorities might have struggled to reach and get to for whatever level, there's ways of getting their ear and getting them to listen to you, because you can make their life easier. That's basically what commissioning is all about. You're making their life easier because you're either reaching people and delivering things in ways that public services can't, or you are doing things in more creative, innovative and cost-effective ways, or they just want to subcontract aspects of what needs to be done, and that's what ultimately commissioning is about. And here, it's giving you that sort of tick list, bit like with funding. You've got to meet the priorities, you've got to show that that you've got a track record, and that you've got the capacity to deliver what it is that needs to be done and be able to report back on it. Trading is great because you're just selling your goods, people are buying them, everybody's happy, providing there's good quality stuff and good customer service and everything else. with commissioning and with funding, there's an additional element of admin work, an additional element of reporting, and people have to think about whether they've got the capacity to do that, and build those costs in for doing that within their proposals. And yeah, sometimes you've got to have an appropriate, governance structure for this stuff, but in the main, commissioners will be funding all sorts of freelancers, companies, social enterprises and others, and you really need to sort of pick partners carefully with this sort of stuff, and look at who people have commissioned before, and what they've delivered, and talk to other people who've delivered commission work to work out, what's the day rate that you put on this, what can you or can't you put in. I'm happy to take sort of questions on that sort of over lunch if anyone's interested, but that's commissioning. I'm going to rattle on with funding and fundraising, and then we'll take a few questions, and it'd be great just before we head into Shelley's session if we've got an example or two from people that are here who've perhaps got a story to tell about something they've done, either access some commissioning opportunity. I know Amy shared a story last time about some work that they've done out in the community. She showed up with a fantastic video. There's a story behind that linked to all of this, and there'll be other people here who've got tales to tell on what they've been up to or what they're trying to do. Last parts of that puzzle, at the bottom, funding and fundraising are two different things. Fundraising is the unrestricted funds. It's the less strings attached method of getting free money to do things with. And these are some examples of fundraising activities, and some of you might have done some of these things or be thinking about these things. Well, I'll come to you now. Anybody here tried any of this stuff? Anybody tried crowdfunding? Anybody tried trying to get sponsorship? Anybody?
At the moment, I'm trying to GoFundMe to raise some money for tools and storage.
Got you. And how are you finding that?
Embarrassing, cringeworthy. Yeah, but there's some nice people.
Mm-hmm. And crowdfunding is a theme in itself, and it's a workshop in itself. And there are some golden rules to crowdfunding, but there are platforms out there that there are all or nothing crowd funds where you have to get it all before you can get any of it, and you set yourself sort of 5 to 6 weeks to try and hit that target. Or there are others like Just Giving and GoFundMe that kind of roll on, and some of these crowdfunding platforms have match funding, so if I was going to be crowdfunding right now, I'd be crowdfunding with Crowdfunder, because they've got up to £10,000 match funding on what they're up to, and there are other things out there of that ilk. Sponsorship and corporate social responsibility, again, you've got to be really careful. What is it they want in return for that? And I don't know whether anybody here has got any examples of having gone for any sort of corporate sponsorship, or having large, or not even corporates, but small local businesses help fund or support aspects of what they're doing, or put money towards something that people are doing to get something to happen.
I have had experience of that in previous life, like this same life, but a previous incarnation where I was working for a charity. And it's great, obviously. You've got to give them a bit of a carrot, haven't you? So if we're making a cookbook or whatever, you've got to put on that they've been involved. So you've got to really think about who you get involved with.
Partly ethically sometimes.
I think
but
so.
Also in terms of what they want from you.
You've got to be, you want to know straight up, first of all, what they want from that partnership as well. But also, ethically, do they fit in with what you're doing? If you're going to have to put on your book or whatever you've made that has been partly paid by them, how will that go down?
Absolutely. And people, when they're doing podcasts and things like that, sometimes people will happily fund podcasts for certain things. Sandrine, you look like you'd got an example there.
No, I was going to say it's the same. I'm working, for a large charity at the moment, and part of my role is to sort of manage funding for smaller charities. And we get a lot from big companies, but it depends on the company. We have to send, or we have to report in a different way. And sometimes it's giving photos, sometimes it's taking them with us on trips, basically to distribute food. If they've funded the food, giving them volunteering opportunities first, and then asking for the money. So it really depends on who the organization is, but the volunteering first makes you find out a lot about what's happening in the organization, what they stand for, and whether you even want to bother asking them money or not.
Absolutely. And we've got sponsorship and CSR and partnerships with local businesses together now, because there's lots of ways of thinking about fundraising and unrestricted funds without thinking about cash. If you go and walk into somewhere and say we need £500 for this, or we need this for that, they'll just go, no. They don't go to them asking for money usually. Go to them offering them something, go to them asking for guidance and advice on something. So I know people who, rather than go in looking at fundraising and traditional things, they went in asking for a marketing mentor. Is there somebody who could tell them something about this? Is there somebody in their HR team who might help them with such and such? And if you can warm them up and they can see you on a level playing field, or they can see how amazing what you're doing is, that's when the floodgates will open. There's an example of a guy I work with down in London where he went in, he was running this like food bank, and he needed all sorts, but he went in asking for marketing help to reach out into the community. And once he got some marketing help, it was Tate & Lyle, the sugar company was who we went to, and within a couple of months, after going asking for some marketing support, they'd given him storage space in the warehouse that they weren't using. They'd given him a van, to cart the food round. So I think going into these things, looking at how you build a relationship is key.
And, I was just thinking about, is it Amy, who you're doing the gardening and the tools? I'm a big fan of a library, so I was just wondering whether you could get like a tool library together. If you could get somebody else to hold all the stuff and be willing to share tools as well. I know, like in Levenshulme, they're doing like their library of everything, the old library where you can basically borrow anything. But I know, like, I'm working with some young people at the moment, some care leavers, and I'm trying to get together a bit of like a tool library for doing DIY and stuff. I'm getting the local authority to try and put their hand in their pocket for that. But like, I just, like, I think as well, you could get somebody interested in holding the tools and running it.
You can collaborate with, for sure, whether it's businesses or
I love that. Yeah, I've got 2 spots in different parts of the borough that I have got a few tools, and my house is quite full. But
you've got to think about
library. You say in library. My local library got in touch the other day asking like how they can help and things, because they've got a little group. So that might be an option. It's just like when you start storing things in places, then there's got to be a deal of, oh, can I use this on borrow this, and then they get lost, or they can get lost, or you need them and they're not there.
That's it. And you need somebody else to do that kind of like booking out type stuff, and doing you need someone who does the checks and all that kind of like, because if you do, if you're doing it properly, you've got to have them all like checked, for safety checked and all of that, haven't you? And people have got to leave the tool clean, and it is quite a lot of effort, really.
But in Jen, I'm going to have to battle on with the rest of these, because we've got one more slide before we just a little break and then some time with Shelley. But absolutely, don't just think about local businesses as necessarily corporates or small businesses. They can be your local library, they can be other VCSC partners. And what I would say is, other charities and social enterprises, there's thousands of them across Greater Manchester. They have budgets to commission, they have things that they can support. We've just backed a crowdfund of a lady who's on Kickstarter, and she's looking at creating these digital stories of Victorian women, you know, and we like the principle of that, you know, we want to support it, we'd like to see that come to pass. So it's thinking it's a bit like we asked you on that 2-sentence business plan, what's unique, what's going to make people want to do this with you over and above somebody else. So the same goes for CSR and partnering with businesses. The other things on here you'll have come across, ticketed events, or don't pay as you feel type stuff. There's memberships or subs, depending on if you're running weekly sessions and these sorts of things. Using social media widely, you know, to reach out and ask for stuff. It's amazing when people ask for things, what comes back either on Facebook or Twitter. I'm less in the Instagram world, but you know, that can be a really useful way to find people, things and support. Community shares and social impact bonds, they're only on there in case you've never heard of them, and we won't ramble on about them, but they're a slightly more advanced way of crowdfunding. And instead of just using a crowdfunding site, you know, or a bucket in Asda, whatever it is, to ask people to donate to whatever it is you're doing, potentially in return for a reward or because they want to give to the cause, community shares and social impact bonds are ways of giving people a return on an investment. And community shares, people might pay whatever, £50 to £100 for a community share, and they'll get a dividend further down the line. Social impact bonds are quite a different beast, but where people are having large scale impact and delivering public sector outcomes, there are a handful of cases where social impact bonds that have been created by, let's say, the Ministry of Justice or a clinical commissioning group or somebody in the public sector has said that for the outcomes that you're going to deliver, we'll create social impact bonds, and people get a return through that. It's complicated, and we'll come back to it if somebody would be interested, but we'd rather tell you that these things exist than you not have ways of looking at. But certainly community shares and community share issues are an accessible thing for anybody to do. And actually Emerge Recycling in Manchester have got a live community share issue now where they're asking people to buy shares in what they're doing, and lots of other ventures have done that. Last but not least, sorry Shelley, I've gone over ever so slightly, but we'll roll into lunch slightly. I just want to come on to the quickly look at funding. Funding and fundraising is almost a workshop in itself, and in the chat in the moment I'm going to put you a link to another webinar. There's only so much we can fit in the Time to Grow programme, but I've got a webinar, it's about 45 minutes or so, on achieving bid writing success, and for people who are looking at this. But looking at funding takes a whole range of things, and what I would say is you've got to have the right governance and legal structure set up, and we've got other workshops on legal structures and governance webinars. So I'm going to put 2 webinars in the chat while Shelley's doing her session shortly after the break, so that if those are topics that are key for you right now, sorting out your legal structure or looking at applying for funding, you've got 2 standalone webinars there that you can look at, and we'd happily chat again tomorrow or over the coming month or 2 on these things. And with your coach you can look at this kind of topic. Basically it's how long is a piece of string, and there's all sorts of funds out there. What I would say is leave no stone unturned. People just think about small amounts of money or whatever's local to them, and it's much more or much less of a drain on your time if you can come up with a bit of a plan as to kind of what funds you might want to go for over the next year or 2, what it would take to make you eligible if you're almost there already, give or take track record and governance, and where you might want to go to. So there's local agencies, there's a bunch mentioned there where they have access to finance and support, and we have contacts for all of these people in Greater Manchester. There's regional funders and support of grants or programs, and regional social enterprise support networks depending on where you live, like Greater Manchester Social Enterprise Network exists to a point, and there's other, Wigan has a social enterprise place status, Salford has social enterprise place status, Stockport's developing its own social enterprise network. So there are areas that have this stuff. Action Together over in Rochdale, Alderman Tameside, these things are evolving. There are national options, some of those you might have heard of, some of you might not, but they're all Googleable at your leisure. And sectorally, depending on what sectors you straddle with how you operate, there's money across the different sectors, both in terms of grants and funds and innovation funds, or other things that are seeking to address different needs. So leave no stone unturned is the option there. And what I usually would suggest people do is create a bit of a bid pipeline, like what kinds of applications might they want to go for in future, and get a database going of what the funds are, a link to the website, how much they're for, and, you know, are they coming up soon? Is it an annual thing? You need to know how much you can go for and when the deadline is. And do you have to, what are the constraints, you know? And 9 times out of 10, people waste a lot of time going for funds that they aren't eligible for, or going for funds that are going to be highly oversubscribed. So being really strategic about what you do is key. And my 2 tips from here, and as I say, I'm going to put some links in the chat to websites for you to digest at your leisure on this topic. Typically, people will go as an individual, which a lot of you are individuals when you first get started. There's only so much you can do. You know, you can try and apply to unlimited, but they're heavily oversubscribed and hard to get money out of these days, unless you fit with certain specific thematic interests that they currently have. The School for Social Entrepreneurs, again, worth looking at. Lots of people through our network have gone through the School for Social Entrepreneurs. It's a support programme, sometimes with £5,000 to £10,000 cash attached. Creates a peer support network and coaching and all the rest of it. They work with individuals, but I would say you've got to have your idea formed, and they've got to think that you're going to be a good candidate for their programme in order to get onto those. We've talked briefly about crowdfunding. We had a quick chat about pro bono support. That's anything in kind that you can get from people, and, you know, clearly sales or donations, or, you know, however you're operating, is the way to bring the money in as an individual, you know, from a standing start. And then from a standing start as groups, and some of you might have approached some of these if you've been going a little while, in order to apply for funds, you've got to have 3 non-related people either on a constitution, so an unincorporated association or constituted group. You've got to have 3 non-related people, or you might call yourself directors if you end up forming a company of some sort. That there's awards for all, various local grants you will need a constitution for, and all sorts of, you know, local, regional and national grants. 9 times out of 10, you've got to have a constitution or be a company in order to go for funding. And that's, you know, it takes people time to think about, do I really want to do this? Do I have a couple of people who I want to have come on board? Who would have come on board and why? And all of that's covered in the legal structures webinar I'm going to put in the chat. And applying for funding and why bother, and what, you know, what not to do is in the Achieving Bid Writing Success webinar that I'm going to put forward. So I will share those in the chat in a second. There's just lots to cover, and we want to make sure that we give everybody the basics, and then people who want more can then dip into those sessions that are relevant for them. And I'm more than happy to come back on this topic a little bit later in the programme. And this is a topic that might come up at the mentorathon that we'll be talking about. So just to sum up, you know, there are these different aspects, you know, and some of them will be relevant for you and some of them won't. But, you know, trading is, you know, getting your products and services, you know, off the ground. Commissioning, you know, might be commissioning, you know, wider reach of certain products, programs or services with particular commissioners, and those products, programs and services must be reaching their outcomes and objectives that they're trying to achieve. Funding and fundraising are really there for you to research and develop new products and services, get things off the ground, subsidize the cost of things. Basically, the point we're making with this slide is not to become funding or fundraising reliant, because that's not a sustainable business. Whatever you're doing with funding and fundraising is pump priming things, getting things developed, testing the method and the model, and building your products and services so that you can then take them to a market that can afford to pay for them, or, you know, do something wider that's funded, having demonstrated a track record for it. So I hope that's...
Could I just share something about commissioning, just because I've got some experience with that, working for a charity? I'll be quick. So
Yeah.
I would say for us, when I worked at Mind, the commissioning journey was a much longer journey. And I know I was an established charity, but we started off getting a pilot fund of 20 grand from National Mind to do a pilot for a year in a GP surgery in Oldham. And so we delivered that, and we chose the surgery where the mental health lead for the CCG was a partner. And he really liked it. So then we got an opportunity to apply for 60 grand to run some mindfulness courses in Oldham, which we did. And then after we'd spent 2 years like delivering all that, we then got offered to bid for a £300,000 3-year contract to roll out our services across every GP surgery. But it was a longer kind of journey.
You're absolutely right with that. And it's perhaps a point we've not highlighted enough. Funding and fundraising are things that you can look at in the early stages to do that research and development work. And if you can find a commissioner to give you that money to save you faffing about, all the better. And what people don't realise is they think it's untouchable, but actually, like I said, if you're doing something innovative or different or creative or reaching parts the commissioners can't, they will listen to you. But you've got to be clear, you've got to have a plan, and you've not got to I don't mean it bad, but you've not got to get above your station, because they're not going to sign a check for anything much more than about 20 grand. They have these thresholds, and typically 5 to 10,000 for sort of research and different activities, or up to 20, 25 for something on a wider scale and more substantial, is as much as you're going to get out of a commissioner for giving you a go, seeing if you can cut your teeth on this pilot and seeing if it works. And then from there,
they actually really like the fact that as a charity, and I would imagine a social enterprise as well, we could respond a lot quicker than like the NHS. We could get things up and running and moving much faster.
Exactly. And there are that's a great point to put in your what's unique about what you can do. Sometimes we're more agile and we're more able to navigate our communities and to get things done more quickly, as you say. So commissioning is not a quick thing, and it takes time, and building that trust and showing the evidence, and then them find it can be very frustrating. They throw you this bit of corn and then it's like, will they or won't they fund something else? But 9 times out of 10, trying to trade or get repeat business through trading and commissioning is far easier than writing a midnight oil funding bid. You're trying till 2 a.m. to get these things typed and done, and you've no idea there's another 150,000 bids going in, and it can feel like wasted energy. So energy and focus and prioritizing is really key in all of this stuff, and your coach or peers on this program will be able to help you sort of think around some of that. So I'm going to stop talking because we are over. We definitely want to give people a 5-minute comfort break, don't we, Shelley?
Yeah.
And we'll roll into lunch by a good 10 minutes, and that should be fine because we took a 45-minute break, so we'll be fine. So I will pause our recording, make sure everybody's got a break, and we'll come back soon. Not bad.
Okay, and welcome back, everyone. So now, because we're about halfway through the programme, we've kind of reached the midpoint now, we thought it might be useful to give you a bit of a checklist to review things that you should be thinking about as you go about starting up your venture. Now, some of these we'll have covered already, some of them you might have started, and others are yet to come, but it's a handy checklist that you can use at this point now to gather your thoughts and to work out what it is you should be focusing on and prioritising. And then we'll also do a little bit of work around prioritisation itself as well. So these are things that you should be thinking about right now at the early stage of your venture. And it's just to help to structure your planning, and also at any point in the future. So if in 2 weeks' time, 2 months' time, you're starting to feel a bit lost, you're not sure what you should be focusing on or where you should be thinking, then this is something you can just come back to and go, oh yeah, I remember that. And you can possibly dig into some of our resources and materials to go into a bit more detail there if you need to. So first of all, taking stock. So we've been working on this program for a number of weeks now. And so it's useful just to spend a bit of time thinking about why is it that you want to start a business? And obviously we've done some exercises to connect with this. So to connect with your purpose and your values, we've looked at the shields exercise. We've done some strengths and skills, some asset mapping. So it's useful to check back in on this now and see, has anything changed? More likely things might have clarified or distilled. You might have a clearer idea about certain things. And then if I can encourage you to do this, not just now or over the next couple of weeks, but just periodically come back, because these things change, they evolve, and your motivations will change, your situation will change, you know, the context in which you're working, your personal life might have shifted, you might have different commitments. So at any point you can go back and revisit those tools and go, okay, does this still apply? Am I still being respectful of what I decided I wanted to do, or have things changed in a way that I want to tweak what I'm doing? So things that you might want to be thinking about, you know, why was it you wanted to start a business or a venture? You know, was it for financial reasons? Did you want some freedom in your day-to-day? Or was there a specific problem that you wanted to work on that you felt really motivated to do something about? Revisit your products and service mix. So it's really useful whenever you're thinking about your products and services to think about what it is, the problem that you're solving. And a more positive way of looking at that might be, how are you benefiting the people that you're serving? And who are the people for whom you're solving this problem? Who are you benefiting? And when you're reviewing your activities and your product and service mix, again, you can go back to that core motivation, the core reason that you started out doing this, and check whether what you're doing is in the service of that mission. Review your skills over time. You'll find that you're doing different things and your skills change. And what is it that you would like to do? And this is a really key one. So ultimately, this is what gets us out of bed in the morning. And so if you're doing something that you really don't want to do, then you're not going to be very motivated to work at it. So revisit that as well. It might be that your desire to work, whether it's part-time or full-time, that might have shifted in one direction or another. So take time just to think about that and really check in with yourself as to what matters and what's going to motivate you to keep going. Struggling to move the slide on, bear with me. I might have to come off full screen, guys. Oh, no, it's working now. Step 2 is refine your idea. So this morning we've started with the 2-sentence business model, and hopefully you've got scribbled down something on that worksheet. And for that, I'd say, don't worry about over perfecting it. You know, if you're at an early stage in your venture, you won't have all the answers to all those questions, which is absolutely fine. But what it's really good to do is to try and get something in that box, something that's a start point, an idea of where you might go with it, because you can come back and you can refine it. And if you've done it on the computer, it's really easy to update, and it's quite a useful way of seeing how you've progressed. Now we'll be looking at the a business model canvas tomorrow, but also some other different business planning tools, which as your venture develops, you might want to go into more detail. You will want to go into more detail. So Nicola's going to take you through another model, which is it's like a slightly more in-depth version of the 2-sentence business model. It's called the social business model canvas. And that will get you to start thinking in slightly greater depth about those boxes. And it's worth, you know, spending time clarifying, refining or developing it. And as I say, just aim at this point to have something in every box, something that you can get out there. You can start testing and feeling, does this sound about right when you're talking about your venture? It gives you some words to play with to see, are they resonating with people? Do people get what you're talking about and what you're trying to do? So research, I'm going to talk quite a bit now about research, and this is really, really important. So a lot of the questions that we ask ourselves at this stage in our venture, we can start to answer. Oh, I've gone the wrong way. That's not helpful, is it? Do some research. That's the correct slide. So a lot of the questions we'll be starting to ask ourselves as we develop our venture, we can answer not by just thinking about it on our own, because that's not necessarily going to lead you to proper insights, but by starting to do some research. So some of the questions that came up this morning, I think we can definitely answer by talking to people. So first of all, your customers. So who is interested in buying your product or using your service? And if you're right at the beginning of your journey, you might not know this yet, and that's totally fine. But what we can tend to do sometimes is spend a whole amount of time thinking about our product, really refining it in our own heads, trying to get it absolutely perfect. Sometimes we might be developing materials, or marketing materials. And actually, a better way around it is to start to talk to your potential customers. So if you've got existing customers, or if you've got the kind of person in mind, and we'll do some work, we'll work on this tomorrow, the kind of people who might buy from you. So start to think to yourself, what's the quickest and simplest way you can find out? First of all, do customers recognize themselves as having the problem that you're trying to solve? So going back to this idea, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? And this is true even if you're not a social business. Every business is trying to solve a problem for their customer or benefit them in some way. And if they're not going to be able to sell any products or services. So do your customers recognize themselves as having the problem that you're trying to solve? Would they use the solution that you've devised? And you might come up with a very simple solution, but you can ask them, would they use this solution, this idea that you've come up with? And then once you know the answer to that, you can interrogate why. So even if your potential customers are saying no, they don't recognize themselves as having that problem, or they don't see the benefit in your product or service or the way you're trying to solve the problem, you can start to understand why. And that's just as valuable as people telling you that they would buy your product and service. So you can start asking these questions, and you don't need to have a finished product or service to start researching this. So there's loads of really quick and easy ways you can do this. So you could create an advert, you could send out an email giving a very rough idea of what the sort of thing you're offering is. And you can start to ask people and say, we're thinking of doing this. Are you interested? I mean, that's just a really straightforward way of doing it. Would you buy or make use of this service? And then if you can go a stage further and even give people the option of signing up or registering interest, and this could be through an online form or something, that's the real test of whether there's a demand for your product and service. If people are replying to you, if they're saying, yeah, put my email down, and when you launch this, I want to hear more, that's telling you there's some demand out there. If they're saying no, then you've got a little bit more work to do to find out why not and what needs to be tweaked. So you can do a whole amount of work before you get to the stage of unveiling your product. So is this something anyone's tried? Has anyone tried talking to potential customers about their idea to get feedback? I can't see everyone's. Oh, Jen, I can see you've raised your hand. Yeah, Jen, what have you done? Oh, you're on mute.
Hi, where I am in Preston, there's an NHS trust. I think they're called, it's called a community asset team, and their role is to link up those people with mental, those people that maybe get referred to them for mental health support, and link them up with social or community groups. And what I see is that there are all these services in the NHS, but they're not actually linked up with community organisations. And there's a really kind of lack of kind of publicity and advertising. So basically, I think that only people who are very, very desperate are kind of are being supported in very niche groups. So I kind of muscled my way into one of these community, it was a bit like a networking meeting, and there were all people related to the NHS community mental health teams. And I just showed my presentation to them, and then about 3 or 4 people contacted me separately. So people from there's like a homeless shelter in Preston, and there's like there's also something called like acute mental health units in the hospital, and various different very niche organizations or connected to the NHS. So for example, social prescribers as well, that are connected to doctors' surgeries, but they don't know. I think it's
question in the chat, didn't you? And I just don't know the answer to that, and I would say they're like gold dust. Those, it's probably another conversation for another day, all of that. But we've certainly know people who could talk to you more about social prescribing and how how to try and get through the Emperor's New Clothes with that one.
Yeah, well, they've all written to me and said, oh, you know, we're really interested in sanctuary cook-alongs, you know, in our community groups, learning how to cook. But yeah, so, but at the moment, our group aren't ready until we've practiced, and we need funding to be able to practice in a group in our own kitchen.
You mustn't go to commissioners too soon, or you've missed your chance.
Sorry, what was that, Nicola?
I was saying you mustn't go to commissioners too soon, or you've missed your chance. They'll just write you off and go, oh, it's another load of people that don't know what they're doing. Move on. Do you know what I mean? They're very hard-nosed, unfortunately. But
so there might be some other customers who are ready for the stage you're at right now, Jen, and how you can have the opportunity to chat to them, and beneficiaries as well. So it's the people, as Nicola said, you've got the beneficiaries the people who you're meeting their needs for, and then you've got your customers. But starting to get a sense and starting to get a conversation going, just to see if there's a demand out there, and it's incredibly worth doing, because, you know, an enterprise that I ran previously was possibly too soon, and when we started talking to people, we realised that we weren't solving a need that they believed they had. So the need was around information literacy and not being misled by false information online, which now is huge because we've got all sorts of war propaganda, vaccine misinformation going on, all sorts of things. But the time we went out there, people didn't recognise this as a need. So a conversation early on would probably have told us sooner. Whether we'd have listened or not, that's remains to be seen, because we thought, you know, this was so important. But starting to have those conversations, you can assess whether there's a need out there. So the next, so it's I would really advocate doing this as early in your product development stage as possible, so you can really start to get an idea of who might be interested in engaging with you on this. And you've had a good response there, Jen, already. And it might be that it's thinking about how you would be engaging with your beneficiaries, because again, once you come to piloting a project, applying for funding, if you've got people involved already, if you've got groups of people showing an interest, you've shown that there's a demand, you are much more likely to get that piece of funding, because you can evidence it. Talking to existing customers, now this is a really, really useful exercise, because you want to be able to find out why it is that they buy from you, why they use your service. And it might be that it's for slightly different reasons than you think. So building in feedback from your existing customers is a really useful thing. And it might also be that there are things about your product and service that they think you can improve. And only by getting feedback from the people who use you will you find that out. There's also, for your existing customers, find out how they found you and then try and replicate it. So until we know what marketing activity, what engagement activities we're doing are effective, we don't know what to do. You could spend a huge amount of time and money on marketing and engagement and not really get anywhere. But if you look at your core customers and find out, how did they hear about you in the first place? You know, was it through word of mouth? And if it was, how would you replicate that? How would you incentivize people to talk about you more? And this is something that you could do really, really easily without having to necessarily do focus groups or intensive research. You can just have phone calls, you can set up Survey Monkeys or Google Forms just to do a quick and easy piece of research to find out more about your existing customer's journey from not being aware of you to using your product and service. And the other thing as well, obviously this information is going to be really useful in terms of making any funding bids for a pilot more likely to be successful. It also increases the chance of your pilot being successful. So if you've actually done some pre-pilot research to find out more about the needs and wants of the community and your potential customers, rather than just thinking about it in your head, it's more likely that when you come to evaluate it, you'll have better results against your key metrics. And then you're in a good position to start thinking about who your potential customers might be in terms of people like, possible commissioners and so forth. So once you've got a good idea of your customers, and we're going to do some work on this tomorrow, which there's some really useful exercises around personas to really get under the skin of who your customers are. it's good to look at your competitors. Now, some of these will be really obvious and will be in direct competition with you, and others might be less so. So they might be in a different geographical area, or they might be in a different sector, but still competing for, say, your customers' time, money, or just their pound, the money that, their headspace, their attention. So find out there what out there is similar, and it might be that someone's doing something completely similar in a different geographical location that you could learn from, and you could learn from them just by doing some online research or by talking to them. Or it might be that there's someone doing something really similar in your existing location, in which case you need to start asking yourself, what is it that we're doing differently, and is there actually a need that we're filling in here? So really understanding the competitive landscape is very useful. And again, is this something that anyone's started to think about, sort of competitive services out there? Sometimes there's opportunities to partner or collaborate with people who could be seen as competitors, or who've got some sort of crossover with the service that you're offering. Has anyone started to look at that, whether it's from a distance or start to talk to people who might be doing something similar in different areas? Not yet. Well, it's a really useful piece of research. And it also, sometimes they'll have done some of the thinking or the work for you, so you can look at what's working maybe somewhere else and adapt it to your context. Sometimes people, especially if they're in the social enterprise or charitable world, are really happy to share their learnings, really happy to do some kind of peer advice. You might even find mentors that way, but I found that a really useful way. People are pretty positive about sharing their experiences, and then you can shortcut some of the mistakes that other people might have made.
So
and then
we have Shelley. Yeah, I mean, we've started looking at competitors and looking in sort of different regional areas, I guess, than where we are, and looking at their websites.
Yeah,
we haven't got a website yet, so we know that's like a massive kind of gap in what we're doing. But looking at their websites has been a good start, and then arranging to go and visit them, and just building on relationships and asking people to introduce us to them as well, going to different sort of gallery spaces and speaking to people. And most people are really, really nice.
That's my experience. Yeah,
really friendly and very open and warm. And we've also, like, Melanie today is on a skills upskilling course she's doing this costume making, because we do a lot of kind of costume work and she can't sew, so that's been really good for us. So it's built, all these lovely kind of relationships and friendships with people who are doing something not the same but similar to us, while she's upskilling, but also building.
And you're building a network as well, which once it does come to something like crowdfunding is vital. The wider your network, and for loads of other things, getting a message out there, marketing your activities when you do them. So it's there's a whole host of reasons why it's a useful exercise to do. Yeah.
I don't know if it's a bit of a dodgy thing or not, because I don't know, someone comes to one of our classes and I'm like, I know they're just like researching. Do you know what I mean?
Highest form of flattery.
That's the way to think about it, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Amy. Then the next point about how to reach your customers, other organisations with some commonalities. I found it really, not everyone is very open, but I found, overwhelmingly people have been, but really interesting to hear how they find their customers. How do they hear about people who might have money to spend? What, especially if it's someone in a different geographic location who doesn't feel like they're competitive with you, they can tell you, but they're in the same sector, they can tell you exactly the kind of bodies that might fund you, the sort of organisations you can talk to, which you just might not have thought of already. And then think about what makes you attractive to your customers. So again, this goes back to what's the problem you're solving. And with this, it's worth thinking about not only the rational vet benefits, so the kind of functional benefits. So, in kind of conventional marketing terms, you get your whites whiter. What is it that functionally you help people to achieve? What are the kind of head reasons that somebody would like to use your service? But the emotional benefits are incredibly powerful as well, especially if you're working in the wellbeing sector, but how people feel having engaged with you, having used the product or your service. And these may well be part of your key metrics, but I find it really useful to split out your goals into rational and emotional. And often the emotional ones are more powerful because that's where people's needs are greater. So while it's good to have an idea yourself of what you think your customer benefits are, it's really important to ask them. So, what are they saying about your products and services? Why do they come to you, and why do they stay to you? And a really good question to ask them, this is called your Net Promoter Score, is how likely they are to recommend you to a friend. And you can do this on a scale of 0 to 5 or 0 to 10. But that gives you a really strong idea of how powerfully they feel about using you. So, obviously, if you're up there in the 8, 9, 10s, their likelihood to recommend you to a friend, you're doing well. If you're in the middle, there's probably some questions you can be asking them about what you can do better. So use that as a learning opportunity. So that's research. Any questions on research before I move on to the next one? Because I realise there's a lot there. I love research, can you tell? Okay, and then make a plan. So you're going to be much more likely to stick to your plan if you write it down, if you set yourself some dates and some specific targets, and then look back on them and see whether you've achieved them. Things do tend to fall off your to-do list if you don't have a written down plan. And talking to a couple of people I've been coaching, often people who are entrepreneurial have got no end of ideas and constantly sparking things that they can do. And so you need to make sure that you're following this through with an action plan and how to do this. We're going to come on to prioritization in a minute, but this is just an example of a really basic milestone planner, and it starts to give shape to what you want to achieve and by when. And also you might want to start to think about who's accountable for which area. So if you're working with other people, so it's really clear who is doing that business model canvas. If it's assigned to you and you want to do it by January, it's really clear. You've set that in a target each week when you wake up, and you can say, right, what is it I need to achieve by this week? So as time goes on, you might want to go into more detail, and I'll give you a couple of examples of this a bit later on. But for now, I'd say you want to have this basic milestone planner for the next 3 to 6 months at least. You can then drill down into a bit more detail and break it out by week. And what often happens is once you start to plan things out, you think you start to see the more detailed things that you actually need to be doing this week quite urgently in order to achieve something in 3 to 6 months, say. So we'll do a bit on that in a moment. It's also really good for reviewing how far you've come, because generally everyone's got far too much to do. It's sometimes hard to see what progress you're making. And if you can look back and say, look, I've actually achieved these things. It might feel like I've got a mountain to climb still, but look at this progress I've made. Really, really good for your motivation. Think about your legal structure. So Nikola's kindly posted the link to the more in detail webinar on the chat, and we'll send that around by email afterwards. People are at different stages. And Nicola's mentioned, obviously, if you start going for grants, you'll need some sort of structure, but there are things you can do as an individual or as a group of 3 people as an unincorporated association, which can get you started and get you to the point of piloting, finding out if these are people that you really want to work with, if your idea's got legs, without having to go to the extent of setting up a formal business. As time goes on, if your pilot's successful, you may well then want to set up as a legal entity. There's various protections in place, but there's also a little, more paperwork to do. You have to file your company accounts. There are some costs associated, but by that point, you'd be ready for that. Funding your business, obviously, we've just talked about that in a fair amount more detail. But something to think about is your personal financial situation, and really start to map out what money you need when in order to live. So in the startup phase, it might be that you've got some money set aside to cover you, have a really clear sense of how long that will last. Or it might be that you've got some other income coming in from different streams in order to get up and running. So it normally takes a bit of time to build your business base. That is completely normal. So you just need to be thinking about how you will fund your day-to-day while that's happening. And then it's also useful to start thinking about what your kind of operating state might be. So how much money will you need to be bringing in once you're a fully operational business? How much do you need to live off? And this will just give you a sense of where you should be aiming for, but also as you start to price yourself, how to price yourself accordingly, and in a way that once you get to the point of being up and running, you are able to live off this. And sometimes people go wrong here and price themselves too low at the outset, and you're not really finding out if the market will sustain you at that point. Whereas if you price yourself at the appropriate level, you will get a sense, will customers actually pay for the products and services that I need to offer at the point that I need to bring in the money. And then finally, step 7, so practical considerations about how you will run your enterprise. So are you planning to work from home, which is obviously much more cost effective? Do you need to be somewhere that your customers can reach? Is it important that they can see you, that you have visibility? Some organisations find a high street presence is useful. What are the pros and cons of the different scenarios, and what's right now, and where do you want to be aiming for? Again, some people do go for their own premises quite early on, which has huge amounts of overheads. And you need to really make sure that you've got the income coming in before you go down that route. And think about what the actual benefits are for you as a business. So it might be that you thrive working in a space with other people. It might be that your beneficiaries need a place to come to where they feel safe. So it's really thinking about the reason why you're doing things. And sometimes there might be a stepping stone to getting to that place. So it might be that there's an existing space that you could make use of on a regular basis, which could feel like your own, and provide a sort of care of address, and people know where to find you without having to take on something quite significant like premises yourself. Also, if you are taking on a space or going to a space, thinking about parking, transport links, accessibility, privacy, all those issues. What's important to your customers? And again, it comes back to asking them. And this is something we find. So when we are designing these courses, we try to get a sense of where people can get to, what will they find most useful. And obviously there's never any one size fits all, but wanting to be as inclusive as possible, we try to make sure that we give some sort of scope for everyone to be able to dip in their own way, which is why we run these online, why we run them offline. We give people the option of attending with their cameras off and not engaging if that's what they feel more comfortable with. But we also recognise that lots of people like the in-person get-togethers, and we're all social creatures, and especially coming out of a pandemic, we realise that we do like to be around each other, and there's advantages there. So it's getting that mix, and we're constantly talking to our participants to find out what would suit them and how can we make sure that we make this as accessible for as many people as we possibly can. And then what works best for you. There's lots of interesting co-working spaces. You might find that there's a space with other like-minded organisations. That's a fantastic scenario to be in, because you can benefit from all their knowledge, their network, and just have a sense of solidarity and community, which can be really motivating. You might want to obviously think about the costs of any particular setup you've got. So as well as rent, there's also business rates, service rates. It might be that you can share a space with somebody to keep costs down. I love there's a model for restaurants, which I just think all restaurants should do this. So where there's actually 2 businesses working in a particular space, because generally you've got cafes or restaurants that are open in the day, or you've got pubs or evening businesses that are open in the evening, and there's a massive chunk of time when they're shut. And I went to a restaurant, it's in Harrogate, it's a Norwegian one, and in the day it's a cafe, and in the evening it's a Norwegian restaurant, and it works. It's 2 organisations, and they've halved their costs just like that. And you kind of look around the high street and see how many places just aren't open 12 hours a day even. And there's real opportunities for thinking about, right, how could we divvy this up so we're reaping the benefits but also halving the costs. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and what we are going to do now is we're going to move into breakout groups, and we are going to discuss where you're up to. And I'm conscious that some of the things we've talked about we haven't quite gone into the detail on, but we will be. But you should have enough to start to working on each of the 7 steps and to start making progress. So what we'd like to do is just a bit of peer support around where you're up to, which areas you think you need to work on, and where you've got stuck. And if I can encourage you in your groups, if you spot something that somebody's stuck on, just to try and get under the skin of why that might be. So is it, you know, avoidance because you really don't like that area of the business? And if that's the case, are there any ways in which you could find extra support? Or what is it that needs to be done in order to get unstuck on that particular point? So how are we doing for time? Not too bad. We are going to run a bit into lunch. Okay, so I'm going to give you, how long would we like? We generally like longer breakouts, don't we?
We're going to put people in twos, won't we? So at least.
Great idea, let's do it in twos. And then if we give you 5 or 10 minutes, does that sound like enough? It's never enough time, isn't it? Sandrine's nodding, okay. Right, let's do that then. So bear with me.
Is there a final bit before that last?
Well, we were going to do 2 exercises. That was the last one before breakouts, and then we were going to do some individual looking at our priorities.
Yeah, I think let's get into breakouts in pairs, and then they can be thinking about the other bits over lunch, I guess, just so you get your breaks in and get your head clear, ready for Gurge coming.
Right, I've set up 7 breakout rooms. If you find that you're on your own, then come back and we'll reallocate you. Okay, and we're going to give you, say, 5 to 10 minutes. We'll give you about 8 minutes, I'm going to say. Okay.
I'm in one for some reason, Shelley, so I'll stay out.
No worries, I'll move
whoever's there with
Gillian.
There you go. Oh, she's gone. Or I could just go in with her and find out what she's doing.
Well, I think we've probably got other people who haven't joined. Let me check.
Right, if Asma's.
Yeah, I'll move Gillian to Sandrine's room, which is room 7.
There you go. There she goes.
Right.
Two. That's good. You've gone perfect.
Great.
It's so hard, isn't it? You know, there's so much you can cover, and it's, you know, in a room, people are feeding in all the time, so you feel as though people are getting a chance to say stuff. But on Zoom, you have to try and chunk out a little bit here and there, and then get off piste. Or anyway, it's all good fun, and people are getting lots from it by the sound of it. So we'll look forward to hearing what they say and having Gurge come back shortly. Come back after breakouts there, so I shall leave you to the last.
I've lost my Zoom, which is really annoying.
It's really funny trying to rush against the clock, trying to put in as much information as possible before the last second, and you're being kicked out of the breakout room.
I know, it really is. So sorry, there's never enough time for chatting, and we're just going to whiz through the last bit of this section before lunch. Bear with me, I will just share my screen again. How did people find that? Was that useful as a kind of memory about the things that we've talked about and the things that we should be working on? Is it a useful checklist?
And hopefully not too overwhelming. I know there's a lot in there, but you do this in your own sort of way, if you know what I mean. And it's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just want to have a very quick chat about prioritization. This is something that a number of people have mentioned as wanting some support with time management and how to prioritize. So this is something we've not got time to do this exercise now, but I would encourage you to do it in your own time, and just to start to think about what are your key priorities. Start with the first next 3 months initially. Write down specifically what you want to achieve and by when, and then start to think about what you need to do in order to get there. So those are the 3 key questions, and you can do this in any way you like. You might just write it as a list if that's what suits you, do that. But I've just got these very quick scribbles. So this is another way you might want to do it. And I find this really
doodler. That looks like mine. In fact, mine's far messier than that.
Oh, mine's an absolute scroll. But what's really useful, so say this is just an example project. Say you've got you're planning to deliver in September, which sounds like miles away. You've got loads of time, haven't you? So you start to map it out backwards. So your delivery dates, you've got these penciled in, you've agreed a partner with whom you can deliver. Then you need to start thinking about what needs to be done. So you've got some delivery planning to do. you need to get some money in place. There's some school holidays, so depending on your situation yourself or the people you're working with, it might be that there's some time out for school holidays, so map those in there as well. Map in times that you're not available, whether it's because of holidays, whether it's because you are only working on this part-time, or you've got other commitments. Then you need to start thinking about specific dates. So here I've got deadline. So that's a funding deadline, which is July the 15th, which sounds like a long way away from September, but actually a funder will have to have some time to make a decision. So look at the funding bids that you're considering and see what the decision-making time is. Sometimes they've got a fixed deadline, sometimes it's rolling, but they might say they'll get back to you in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 16 weeks. It can be a really long period of time. So you need to build that in. So write down the deadline date and the decision date, because on August the 15th, that's when you have to start planning your delivery, which doesn't give you a huge amount of time to get the project up and running, depending on the kind of scale of it. Working back from your deadline, what needs to be done there? So I normally put a date in for a final draft, a section in for feedback and amends. So it might be that you've got a group you're working with or some people that you'd like to get some advice on, especially if it's one of your first bids. Build that time in. If it's a very tight window, make sure those people are available for that time. Then put in a chunk of time to draft your bid. So you need to be thinking about what goes in it, what the budget is. Just before that, you'll need to be starting to engage with potential partners, people you want to work with on this, because you want to include them in the bid. So you've got some planning time in there as well. You've obviously got a chunk of research time in there, which you'll do before you start to write your bid. You'll have the facts and figures, the evidence that there's a need for the service that you're planning to pilot, and that needs to be chunked in there too. And then if you've checked through all the eligibility criteria, you'll probably see that there'll be some specific things that you'll need to have done beforehand. So most funders will expect you to have a bank account, a separate bank account. It won't necessarily have to be in your organisation's name. You can possibly have it in your own name, but it should be separate. You really, should keep it separate from your personal accounts. It might be that you need to have your group constituted. So these are the things, the very first things that you need to start setting in motion, because it can take a number of weeks or months to get a bank account going. To get your group constitution up and running and agreed between the 3 people that you're planning to have on the constitution, we'll take a bit of conversation and discussion to make sure that you're all happy with how you're planning to run your business, how you're planning to run your group, and the ways in which you're going to proceed with things. It takes a bit of time. So those will be the first things you need to start rolling. So just by doing this kind of backward scroll, starting with what the end point of the project is, you very quickly start to see what needs doing, possibly this week actually, because these things do take a bit of time. So that's the scroll version. And then this is the Excel spreadsheet version, and I think the scroll version is great, especially if you've got a team. You can just start mapping out a really rough one. Once you've got that, if you can get it onto Excel, more the better, because it's so much easier to update and adapt. And again, this just shows you exactly for one specific project. And once you've got this for one project, you can then start adding different projects underneath, and you see you might have a few things in play, but week by week you'll be able to see the things you have to get sorted out this week. And it really focuses the mind, seeing it like this, seeing that for way months ahead in September or October, you need to be doing some stuff and you need to be ticking them off your list this week. So we've not unfortunately got time to start doing our prioritisation exercise, but I would.
You'll get the slides and you'll certainly be able to have around that.
And these 3, I cannot control this slideshow. It's right.
And I was going to say, thinking about these things ahead of speaking to your coach, or alongside speaking to your coach over the coming months, will be a useful exercise as well. It might be, a good prompt, or they might be able to review that sort of thing with you and feel your way through what feels realistic, what feels overwhelming, where are the blockers, what happens if X, Y, and Z doesn't happen, that kind of thing. So
absolutely. But yeah, just return to this slide and work through this on your own as your start point. So your key priorities for the next 3 months. and start getting some dates in. And then just before lunch, we were going to quickly talk through this opportunity for show and tell tomorrow.
Should we do it? I think, should we do it? Oh, is it, do you think people are leaving?
In case anyone's leaving, that's all.
Okay, yeah. And we'll mention this again at the end, but yeah, go for it, Shelley.
Absolutely. This is just in case anyone's leaving this afternoon. There's an opportunity to showcase your idea to the whole group or in smaller grade breakouts if you'd prefer to do that. And it's a chance to talk about your idea in a nutshell, the problem you're solving and for who, how you're going to solve it, what makes your approach different, and also to put out any offers or requests. So 3 minutes maximum. If that's something that you're interested in doing, have a think about that this evening.
Well, everybody's going to do it. There's no getting out of it, my friend. Tomorrow, you'll either do it in front of everybody if that's your thing, or you'll do it in small breakouts. So we'll put that in the chat later so that people have got it. And you know, ultimately, it's just giving you a few more minutes. I know you've talked very practically today, probably about what you're doing, where you're at with things. Tomorrow is a chance to, you know, give people, or a different set of people, kind of the lowdown on where you're at, what you're trying to do, and perhaps talk about any offers or requests. And I would say if there are people who would rather speak to the whole room because there's something you need, or there's something you want to offer or mention, we'll happily have you guys go first tomorrow morning to sort of, as a bit of a series of pitches almost, so kind of who's doing what and who's after what, and then we'll then put you in breakouts so the people who don't want to be exposed to the room can talk in smaller groups, as Shelley said. So Shelley, would you, I can't get hold of the content, are you able to cut and paste those bullet points in the chat, just so people have got that? And then yeah, it's fairly laid back, and we'll make sure everybody's got a break till 15:15. So we'll come back at 15:15. We've got half an hour's break, and we'll look forward to a session with Gurge talking about business finances, setting them up, managing them, and takes the fear out of the finance side of things. So we'll see you all soon.